Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the podcast. And today I'm going to go my review of AEW's Dynamite. Starting off the evening, we'll go to our first match of the night. It is for the Dynamite Diamond Ring. It is MJF versus Juice Robinson. I thought it was a good match. Back and forth matchup between MJF and Juice, with MJF keeping the pace. Jay White ends up showing up. Gun Club then attack MJF. Juice Robinson then hits a devastating powerbomb on MJF for a near fall. MJF then puts on the Dynamite Diamond Ring, ends up hitting Juice with the ring, which allows MJF to ultimately hit the Heat Seeker on Juice Robinson, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match is MJF. After the match, the Gun Club end up attacking MJF. Kingdom come down to the ring to try to save MJF. Then the Acclaim music hits. The Acclaim come down to the ring to save MJF. Gun Club then grab a microphone, say they want a match with for the Ring of Honor Tag Team Championships, and it looks like it's going to be Gun Club versus MJF for the Ring of Honor Tag Team Championships at Full Gear. After that, MJF then walks up the ramp. Kenny Omega's music hits. He comes out to the stage. Omega and MJF get face to face. Omega says that he wants the World Championship, and then MJF says that it will be the Devil versus the Cleaner on Collision this weekend. Man, I'm definitely excited about this. And to be honest with y'all, just looking at what happened with this match and everything else like that and what transpired, and Kenny Omega, I mean, I mentioned this multiple times now for the past couple weeks, that Omega and guys like Samoa Joe and Wardlow have been really trying to have a match with MJF for the World Championship. And to be honest with you, I'm all for it. I know some people are like, you know what, I'm not really too keen on this Kenny Omega versus MJF match on Collision. To be honest with you, man, I'm all for it. I think it's going to be a great addition to Collision. It's going to be a great main event. To be honest with y'all, and I was going to touch bases on this towards the end of the podcast, but since we're talking about it, I think it's going to be, a disqualification. To be honest with you, I don't think MJF or Kenny Omega is going to get the win clean in this matchup. I know even before this match even took place, I know they had somebody on the Titantron wearing the Devil's mask. And again, I mentioned to y'all multiple times now for the past few weeks who I believe it might be in the Devil's mask. And to be honest with you, man, it's one of those storylines that, who knows who that person is. My opinion, I think it's Adam Cole, but again, it's still yet to be seen. But I think a lot of things are going to start leading up towards Full Gear. Obviously, this main event between Omega and MJF is going to be absolutely awesome. So I'm definitely looking forward to that on Collision tonight. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. Moving on from that, though, we'll go into our next match of the night. It is John Silver and Alex Reynolds versus RVD and Hook. I thought this was a good match as well, man. Back and forth matchup between both teams with Reynolds and Silver keeping the pace of the match. RVD then hits a Rolling Thunder. RVD then hits Reynolds with the Frog Splash, and then Hook applies a Red Rum, and your winners of the match are RVD and Hook. A couple things about this too, man, and I'm, again, it won't be, a long conversation about this, but RVD, man, RVD, he's been doing some phenomenal work with AEW. And I believe it was on his podcast, he was talking about that, his appearances with AEW might hinder him for being at WrestleMania 40 in Philly. I don't know if, WWE is going to stoop that low, but then again, who knows? It'll be great to see RVD, obviously, in Philly at WrestleMania. Obviously, RVD has a lot of ties to Philly from his days in ECW and working under Paul Heyman. He's had a tremendous career and made a humongous name for himself over at ECW. So I don't know if RVD will be at WrestleMania 40 in Philly or not, but I think it would be messed up, man, if they don't put RVD on that show in some kind of capacity, man, because the guy's a legend, especially in Philly, man. ECW was one of those promotions, and I mentioned this multiple times to y'all, that changed the game. 100%, man. This was a time in the early 90s where, music was all over the place at the time, from, hip-hop to, punk rock, grunge, all this stuff. And ECW just brought in that just in-your-face mentality, brought in that hardcore dynamic that a lot of fans were, grasping for, because we weren't really getting that before ECW even came along, man. A lot of the hardcore stuff that you would see was over in Japan, and you really weren't getting, unless you were somehow getting the tapes from companies like FMW, you really weren't seeing what was going on overseas as far as what they were doing hardcore-wise. I mean, the brand that Onita had with FMW and the roster that he had, and the matches were just incredible, man. I mean, they reinvented or invented, if you will, the bar bar death match. And Onita's really known for that. And I mean, matches that he had with Hayabusa. Again, absolute big fan of Hayabusa. Rest in peace to Hayabusa. But you really weren't getting that hardcore dynamic in the States until ECW and Paul Heyman came around and really gave the US, the American fans an idea of what hardcore wrestling was all about. So I'm hoping that RVD will be at WrestleMania 40, even though he's been working with Tony Khan and AEW. And for what it's worth, man, I don't know if Tony Khan's even hinting around on possibly signing RVD to a contract with AEW, but man, the work that he's done so far in AEW has been absolutely flawless, man. It's been awesome. Him teaming up with Hook. I would like to see RVD in a singles run, to be honest with you. I think he has a lot of good matches on the table in AEW. I'd like to see a Darby Allin RVD match as well. There's just a lot of good matches on the table for RVD, so I'm hoping that Tony Khan and AEW do give RVD an opportunity and possibly a contract somewhere down the line. I think it'd be awesome for RVD to be, sticking around with AEW. Moving on from that, we have Tony Schiavone in the ring, pretty much interviewing Sting. Sting comes out to the ring with Darby Allin. Sting then grabs a microphone, thanks Philadelphia, because obviously Dynamite was in Philly. He thanks Philadelphia and Darby Allin. He also gives a lot of praise to Darby Allin and says that he would not be in the position that he's in right now in AEW if it wasn't for Darby Allin. Sting also thanks Tony Khan for giving him the opportunity to come back and to rewrite his story and rewrite, his ending of his career. Schiavone then says Sting put wrestling on the map as far as, wrestling me on the map for TBS and TNT, which I absolutely 100% agree with that. And then, Schiavone says that Tony Khan is giving him a gift, and that gift is none other than the Nature Boy himself, Ric Flair. The crowd erupts. Flair comes down to the ring. He grabs a microphone. He praises Sting. Then Christian music hits. Christian's at the stage. He pretty much mocks Ric Flair, which I thought was hilarious. And Christian says that he wants a match with Darby and Sting and a partner of their choosing in the foreseeable future. So, a couple things from this, man. This was a huge moment that happened on Dynamite, and, a lot of people are, okay with it. A lot of people are actually really against this, man. There was a lot of controversy with bringing in Ric Flair into AEW. And to be honest with you, excuse me, I'm not against it, man. I mean, you got to look at the nostalgia of what it is. And nostalgia is a hell of a thing, number one. And two, I mean, for what it's worth, man, if you're, okay, I'm just going to put it in a dynamic for y'all and let y'all understand. You guys obviously are here because y'all are wrestling fans. And I'm a fan myself, number one. Ric Flair, I truly believe we wouldn't have Sting if it wasn't for Ric Flair. I think Ric Flair really did put Sting on the map. I mean, I remember, matches that Sting had, and obviously early in his career, but way before WCW was actually, a thing, if you will, and it was NWA and stuff like that. Sting's had a hell of a career. I mean, you guys also have to remember this. Sting was also tag team partners with the Ultimate Warrior. That's how he really got his start. And he was, wrestling for Jerry Jarrett and Tennessee. And, obviously Ultimate Warrior went on to do his own, Warrior went on to do his own thing with WWE and had, a decent career. I'm not going to say that Warrior had a, all-time greatest career of all time, but I also think WWE fumbled Ultimate Warrior's career as well. I mean, he had great matches. That match he had with Hogan, belt versus belt. You had the WWE Championship on the line as well as the Intercontinental Championship, and Warrior beat Hogan and became double champion, and really put Ultimate Warrior on the map. And Sting really came into his own. You had the Surfer Sting coming out with, the crazy jackets and stuff like that and just putting on, phenomenal matches. And Sting, I mentioned this, I think it was last week, man, when WCW really came into the fold with Ted Turner and stuff like that. Sting was the guy. Sting was the flagship guy that was carrying the banner for WCW. He was a lifer, man. I mean, he was there from the very beginning till literally the last episode of Nitro. So, I mean, you got to give the guy credit where credit's due. And even Ric Flair was giving him a lot of praise and saying he was one of the nicest guys in the business. And I believe him. I really do. I think Sting is not one of those guys that deals with a lot of bullshit, to be honest with you, man. He's in there to wrestle, do his job, and give the fans a hell of a performance. And Sting has, even now, at the age that Sting is at, he's still doing that, man. I mean, look at the stuff that he's done with Darby. in AEW, flying off, stage structures and stuff like that, and balconies, and even the match that he had with Brian Cage and Ricky Starks with Team Taz. Phenomenal matches, man. Phenomenal matches. But people are also concerned with Ric Flair because they feel like Ric Flair might take the spotlight away from, Sting's retirement tour. And on that note, I'm not going to disagree with y'all, man. Ric Flair likes the spotlight. That's all about Ric Flair. That's what he wants to do. And Ric Flair is saying that he wants to be there, for the end for Sting. I mean, I don't know how that's going to, play out. Is Ric Flair going to be there on every single Dynamite? Who knows? I think it was a big move by Tony Khan to bring in a guy like Ric Flair and put him on television, especially after all the controversy with Rick alone. I mean, a lot of stuff came out with Rick after the episode of Dark Side of the Ring when he was on that airplane, and other names were mentioned and stuff like that, which I'm not going to mention those names because it's, obviously it's not about them. But, Ric Flair, played a crucial part in that story that was being told on Dark Side of the Ring, and it wasn't really a good story. It had a lot of negativity and a lot of stuff that was like bad leading towards Ric Flair, and I think it kind of hindered Rick, to be honest with you. And to see him on Dynamite, I guess kudos to Tony Khan in a way for Tony Khan really not giving a damn about the situation, I guess. But it's going to be very interesting to see how this whole thing plays out with Rick and Sting moving forward, because at the same time, I don't want it to be that Ric Flair is taking the spotlight away from Sting. But, again, Sting has, he still has a lot more matches on the table before he retires. So we're going to see what happens, man. I mean, I told y'all before, man, when Sting announced that he was going to retire at Revolution 2024, Darby Allin needed to be a part of that retirement. And to be honest with you, I think it's something that, because Sting has so much praise for Darby Allin, I think it's something where Sting needs to pass the torch to a guy like Darby Allin. And Sting, Darby Allin, not taking anything away from Sting. Sting is an all-time legend. But to me, looking at it now and for the future, to me, Darby Allin is that next guy. He is that next Sting. He's that enigma that, people want to see. And to me, Darby, I feel like Darby is a lifer for AEW. And I think what he's done in AEW is, pertaining to Darby, has been phenomenal work, man. And I think him working with Sting has only elevated both Sting's career, especially Darby Allin's. So hopefully we get Darby Allin a part of Sting's last match in AEW. But again, cool stuff to see. And again, I look forward to what's going to happen next with Ric Flair. Are we going to see him more on Dynamite? Who knows, man. But I'm definitely looking forward to it. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the Ring of Honor 6-Man Tag Team Championships. It is the Hardys and Brother Zay versus the Young Bucks and Adam Page. I thought it was a decent match. Back and forth matchup between both teams with the Young Bucks and Page keeping the pace of the match. Page then hits a buckshot lariat on Brother Zay. Then the Young Bucks hit a BTE trigger on Zay as well. Pins for the 3. And your winners of the match and still Ring of Honor 6-Man Tag Team Champions are the Young Bucks and Adam Page. After the match, Swerve was shown on the Titantron in Page's home. And Swerve says that Page had cost him his title shot. And it looks like Swerve has some unfinished business with Adam Page and vice versa. So we're definitely going to get another match between Swerve and Page. And honestly, I'm all for it, man. I really am. I think, Swerve and what he's done up to this point, and I mentioned this multiple times in the past, man, I'm going to reiterate this. Swerve is underrated. And Swerve needs to be world champion at some point. Maybe not right now, but give it a little bit of time. Swerve will be, he will definitely be world champion. I'd be very surprised if he's not. Swerve is underrated. And to be honest with you, this storyline right now with him and Page is absolutely awesome. And I definitely look forward to what's going to happen next. And I think we are going to get another match between Swerve and Page in the foreseeable future. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It's for the AEW Women's Championship. It is Ruby Soho versus Shida. I thought it was a decent match. Back and forth matchup between Soho and Shida, with Shida keeping the pace of the match. Ruby then hits a No Future. Ruby and Shida then both exchange. Ruby then hits a Destination Unknown on Shida. Shida gets up, hits a Katana for a near fall. And then Shida goes for another Katana on Ruby Soho, pins her for the 3. And your winner of the match, and still AEW Women's Champion, is Shida. Hats off to Shida for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of Dynamite. It is Okada teaming up with Orange Cassidy versus Bryan Danielson and Claudio Castagnoli. I thought it was a great match. Back and forth matchup between both teams with Danielson and Claudio keeping the pace of the match. Okada and Claudio then both exchange. Okada and Danielson then exchange. Danielson then lands yes kicks. Orange Cassidy then mocks Danielson with yes kicks of his own. Orange Cassidy then hits a Stun Dog Millionaire. Orange Cassidy then goes for an orange punch, but Claudio counters it with a giant swing. Orange then gets up, hits an orange punch again, which allows Okada to hit a Rainmaker on Danielson, and Claudio then ultimately hits the finish, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are Bryan Danielson and Claudio Castagnoli. Hats off to Bryan Danielson and Claudio Castagnoli for getting the win in this matchup. A couple things I want to say about Dynamite, man, before I get out of here. It was a solid show from top to bottom. Obviously, the big news break was Ric Flair. Ric Flair showing up on Dynamite was huge. With the whole gift to Sting, if you will. And like I told you guys earlier, man, I don't know how it's going to play out with Rick. I really don't. Am I against him being there? No, I'm not against him being there, man. He played a crucial part in Sting's career. On multiple reasons. I mean, for the fact that, this goes back to the time where Rick had the Four Horsemen, the matches that Sting had in his early career in NWA. Sting's first title win was against Rick, I believe, at the Great American Bash in Baltimore. Rick has really done everything he could to put Sting over, and he did tenfold. So to see Ric Flair there, I can honestly understand why he was there. But on the flip side of that coin, I don't want it to be that Ric Flair takes all the spotlight away from Sting's retirement tour. And that's going to be the biggest thing in all this, man. How is Rick really going to play out and play into this whole thing with Sting's retirement tour? Because I don't really think we necessarily need to see Ric Flair on Dynamite every single week until Sting retires. I really don't. The other big thing I want to get into as well is that AEW has, for the past couple weeks, been announcing, or rumored to have another pay-per-view before the end of the year. And that actually has come to fruition, and that is actually going to happen. It was announced on Dynamite that on December 30th in Long Island, I believe at the Nassau Coliseum, it will be the World's End pay-per-view in December, on the 30th of December in Long Island, and the pay-per-view is called World's End. Couple things about this announcement, man. Number one, this was quick. I mean, when I was looking online and looking at the dirt sheets and stuff like that and the news that was coming out, it was literally the day of they announced that they filed the trademark for World's End, and then literally on Dynamite they announced that that's going to be the pay-per-view name, and it's going to take place December 30th in Long Island, which I think was also interesting for the date, because if you guys think about it, this pay-per-view is taking place in Long Island, New York, MJF's hometown. And this whole thing about MJF is that his contract's coming up January 2024. This plays out perfectly, man, for MJF. 100%. I mean, to have MJF on this card, possibly main eventing this card, and he should. And for him, who knows if he's going to re-sign with AEW or what? Will he walk out and go to another company? Will he go to WWE? Who knows? But to see it being at Long Island, MJF's hometown, December 30th, 2 days technically, if you think about it, before his contract is up, if you want to look at it like that, it's poetry in motion, man. It's awesome. It was great. It's great storytelling by Tony Khan. So, I mean, hats off to Tony Khan for, putting this event together. I think it's awesome. I think it's going to be a great idea for MJF as far as storyline base is concerned, and for his contract coming up, man. I mean, I would be very surprised if MJF does leave AEW. And I'm not, taking anything away from other companies like WWE and stuff like that. Right now, MJF, what he's done in AEW has been flawless, man. And, I know a lot of people mentioned, like, when Cody left, it's going to cripple AEW. And maybe it did a little bit. I'm not going to sit here and say that it didn't cripple them a little bit. But there are certain superstars that are on that roster that if they were to leave, it might literally crumble them to nothing. And MJF is one of those guys. I think MJF, the Elite, I think if they leave, man, I think AEW is really not looking good after that. Obviously they lost Cody Rhodes. They just recently lost Jade Cargill. But and obviously, like I told you guys before, there is a short list of current AEW, superstars on that roster that are on the short list, in my opinion, to WWE. And I think that's Wardlow. And I also believe that's Ricky Starks. I think Ricky Starks and Wardlow are on that short list to possibly go over to WWE. And the whole dynamic over in WWE has completely and drastically changed. I mean, obviously, Vince McMahon is not in control creatively right now. It looks like Triple H is taking over creatively for both Raw and SmackDown. So, I mean, obviously for some of the superstars, it might be appealing. Maybe they don't want to work for Vince, but they want to work for Hunter. So, it's going to be an interesting end of the year. I think it's going to be an interesting year next year for pro wrestling, man. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on right now, just in wrestling as a whole. I mean, you're looking at, Impact Wrestling. And I mentioned this last week, man, that Impact went from Impact Wrestling back to the original TNA name. And Scott D'Amore got the name back for TNA. And that's going to change going into January of next year. Their first pay-per-view, I believe, for TNA going into next year is Hard to Kill under the new name or old name of TNA, which is great. I think it's awesome for TNA and the talent they have over there in Impact Wrestling. I think it's awesome. Then you have NWA and what Billy Corgan's doing with NWA. Obviously, they got the TV deal for CW Network, so obviously they're going to be on network television, which is absolutely awesome for Billy Corgan and his staff over there, so that's awesome. And the other big things that are going on in wrestling right now, you also have Will Ospreay. So Will Ospreay is going to be a free agent, and he's obviously there's going to be a lot of companies that are going to be trying to get a talent like Ospreay. Obviously Hunter is going to try to WWE side is going to try to get Ospreay, and Tony Khan and AEW are going to try to work with Ospreay and sign him. I know some people even mentioned TNA. I know some people even mentioned CM Punk joining TNA. Look, I'm not trying. If you're a TNA fan, I mean no disrespect at all. I was a big fan of TNA back in the day and what they were doing, and they had a great roster back in the day, from Jarrett to Booker T to AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, Christopher Daniels, Frankie Kazarian. That's just to name a couple, man. They had a great roster. They really did. But do I think they had the money and the resources to hire and bring in a guy like Ospreay and CM Punk? I truly don't believe that. I really don't. That'd be like you telling me that Billy Corgan and NWA are going to sign a guy like CM Punk and Will Ospreay. They don't have the resources, man. They don't have the funding to bring in guys like that for a long-term contract deal. It's just not on the table currently right now. And it's no disrespect towards TNA at all. I think what TNA is doing right now is awesome. Going back to the old name, it's going to do a lot of great business for TNA in the foreseeable future, obviously with t-shirt sales and merchandise and stuff like that, and new stage structures and stuff like that. It's going to be awesome for TNA, and I'm very excited for them. But as far as bringing in guys like Will Ospreay and CM Punk, I think TNA and that whole rumor they need to pump their brakes a little bit, man. I don't think it's going to happen. I really don't. And that's just me being honest with y'all. I'm not going to bullshit you. That's just how I feel. Going to WWE is an option. For Will Ospreay, possibly. For CM Punk, I mean, it's up in the air, man. I mean, it's a lot of people are saying, even on WWE side, they don't want to bring in Phil Brooks. They just don't want to be a part of that whole situation. They done been there, done that, and for right now on the table, it doesn't look like CM Punk is going to be returning to WWE. Now, could things have changed? Sure, things can change. But for right now, as it currently stands, it doesn't look like Phil Brooks will be returning to WWE as of right now. Will Ospreay, on the other hand, it's definitely a possibility, man. It's definitely a possibility that Ospreay will be taking his talents over to WWE. And I'm not ruling that out. It's the same thing for even current talent on AEW right now that are not free agents. Like when the whole Jay White thing was going on, and Jay White was contemplating going to WWE and AEW, at that time, Vince was still in power. And maybe if roles were reversed and Vince wasn't in the power position that he was then when Jay White was a free agent, who knows? Would Jay White go over to WWE? Now, credit what Jay White's done in AEW has been absolutely awesome. And do I think Jay White made the right decision? Absolutely. And that's not me being an AEW super fan or, he only likes AEW. No. Right now for what Jay White was doing, is doing in AEW, and obviously the working relationship that he obviously had with New Japan, it keeps that option open. You're not really going to get much options as far as working outside WWE and WWE. With AEW and Tony Khan's given his talent opportunities to work for other companies and make appearances, whether it's on the Indies or New Japan or possibly Impact Wrestling. He's leaving that option open. So for a guy like Will Ospreay, who's had a lot of allegiance, if you will, and spent majority of his career over in New Japan, I don't know if he wants to still keep, do business with New Japan still. And if he does, then obviously the smart decision would be, signing a contract with AEW, keeping that working relation open with New Japan and AEW. It's different. It's depending on how he looks at the deal. Obviously, the money is over. I wouldn't even say the money's over in WWE because I think Tony Khan just has, if not more money than WWE does right now. So it's really up to Will Ospreay and what's best for him and his family moving forward. As a fan, I would love to see Will Ospreay stay in AEW and continue to do work with AEW. I think it would be great. I think there's a lot of good matches on the table for him in AEW, and keeping that working relation open with New Japan. It's a win-win for Ospreay. But again, I'm not Will Ospreay, and he's going to do what's best for him and his family. And I'm all for it. Whether he goes over to WWE, awesome. Or if he does, wants to still work with AEW and signs a contract, awesome. I'm all for it. But, at the end of the day, the announcement of the pay-per-view does do a lot of things for MJF moving forward. Obviously, and again, I will reiterate this, again, that, with all these pay-per-views and AEW's adding more pay-per-views, does this mean that possibly going into next year, AEW will be working exclusively with HBO Max as far as a catalog is concerned and pay-per-views? Because honestly, for what it's worth, it makes sense, y'all. It really does, because they have a great catalog. All these AEW pay-per-views and all these great moments when like Moxley debuted at Double or Nothing. And, it makes sense. It really does. And I don't know if that, if they do sign with HBO Max and put their pay-per-views on HBO Max, does that mean that Ring of Honor will also be a part of that deal with HBO Max? Who knows? But my thing is this. I mean, you're going to bring more fans into the product if you have a working deal with HBO Max, or Max, if you will. Even people that are not fans of pro wrestling and seeing that on HBO Max or Max, it might entice them to watch it. I mean, honestly, who wouldn't want to go back and watch the first All In? You know what I mean? I mean, that card was stacked. That first show they did was the stepping stone in what they are now. And the card was absolutely flawless, man. It was a great show. And it opened up, that show right there opened up a lot of doors for guys like The Elite, Cody Rhodes, Adam Page, and so on and so forth, man. So they had the catalog to do it. But again, who knows what's going to happen, man. I think next year for wrestling as a whole is going to be absolutely incredible next year, man. A lot of things are going to be going down in pro wrestling next year, and I'm very, very excited to see what happens next in professional wrestling. But with that being said, this is my review of AEW's Dynamite. I hope you guys are out there staying safe. Be careful, and remember, stay classic. Peace.